The handcart had a bad wheel. Mara Vexley had known that since Laramie, and she had learned to lean her weight to the left so the thing ran straighter, the way a person learns to walk on a sore foot. Eli walked beside the cart with one hand on the rail, not because he needed to but because she had told him to stay close. Nell rode in the bed on a folded quilt, 10 months old and too quiet, which worried Mara more than crying would have. The track to Coldwater Reach climbed through dry grass and scattered cottonwood, and when the ranch came into sight it looked the way a great many ranches looked in the autumn of 1887. A log house with a stone chimney, a barn twice the size of the house, a corral, a pole shed, and a line of small willows along the north edge that had gone the color of rust. A barn door was banging. It swung out, caught the wind, and slammed and swung out again. Nobody came to stop it. A man stepped onto the porch before she reached the yard. He was tall and narrow, with a hat that had been good once and a coat that had not. He did not come down the steps. He watched her stop the cart, watched her lift Nell against her shoulder, watched Eli move behind her skirt. "I'm Mara Vexley," she said. "My husband died at the Rock Springs cut in June. I have no people east and none west. My children have had bread and water for 4 days and nothing else." She had rehearsed more than that. She had rehearsed a great deal walking. But standing in his yard with the barn door slamming behind her, the rest of it seemed like noise. "Give my kids milk," she said. "I'll clean your ranch." Harlan Bellwether looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned and went into the house without a word, and Mara stood in the yard and did not know whether she had been refused. He came back with a tin cup and a pan, set the pan on the porch rail and went to the barn. She heard the milk cow complain. When he returned he poured the pan into the cup, held it a moment over the stove through the open door to take the chill off, and came down the steps. He crouched in front of Eli and held out the cup. "Slow," he said, "or you'll lose it." Eli drank. Harlan waited, then filled the cup again and handed it to Mara for Nell, who took the milk from a twist of clean rag as if she had forgotten what it was and was remembering. Only when both children had finished did he speak to her. "1 week," he said. "You cook, you keep the house, you stay out of the barn. If at the end of a week I think you're worth the feed, you stay. If not, I'll drive you to Medicine Bow and that's the end of it." He looked at the cart. "That wheel's shot." "I know. There's a room off the kitchen. It's got a bed." The room off the kitchen had a bed and a window and, on a peg by the door, a woman's shawl that nobody had moved in a long time. Mara did not touch it. She put Nell down on the quilt, told Eli to sit with her, and went to see what the kitchen was. The kitchen was a ledger on a table. That was the first thing she saw and the thing that told her the most. A long book lying open with a pencil across it, columns of figures in a careful hand that had gotten less careful toward the bottom of the page. Feed. Texas. A note against the water rights, a name, Glay, and a sum she read twice. She closed the book without turning a page and began with the stove. By dark she had bread rising and beans on and the floor swept, and she had learned the house the way she learned every house, by its sounds. The chinking between the logs on the north wall had pulled away. She could feel the draft at knee-height when she knelt to the hearth. The window in the kitchen did not sit true in its frame. None of it was the kind of thing a man noticed who lived alone and had lived alone for some time. You stopped seeing the house. You only saw the work. Harlan came in at full dark, ate what she put in front of him, said it was good and went to the ledger. He did not ask about her husband and she did not ask about the shawl. She rose before him the next morning, which she had not planned. Nell had woken at 4 and would not settle, so Mara wrapped her in the quilt and walked her, and when the baby finally slept against her shoulder the sky had begun to gray and Mara did not see the point in lying back down. She put on her boots and went out. Her father had built sheep sheds in Wisconsin and then in Nebraska, and he had walked every piece of ground before he put a post in it. "You walk it when the light's flat," he told her, "because the flat light shows you the lay and the morning light lies to you." She had walked beside him from the age of 6, and she had learned to see a property the way he did, as a set of arguments with weather. She walked Coldwater Reach now with Nell asleep on her shoulder and saw what Harlan Bellwether had stopped seeing. The barn doors faced northwest. Whoever had built the barn had set the doors toward the house for convenience, and the prevailing wind came down off the ridge from the northwest and went straight through them and out the loft. The hay was stacked on bare ground inside, and when she pressed her boot to the bottom of the stack it gave with a wet sound, spoiling from the ground up. The good hay on top was sitting on a foot of rot. The water line ran from the spring to the stock trough, and she followed it by the line of greener grass and found where it dipped through a swale not 8 inches under the sod. One hard freeze and it would burst. She went along the north wall of the house and put her fingers in the gap where the chinking had shrunk from the logs and could feel the whole width of the wall. And the willows. She stood at the north edge of the yard and looked at the row of them, 30 feet from the barn, rust-colored and brittle. He had planted them in spring, she judged, when the ground was wet and the cuttings took fast, and they had leafed out hard, and then the summer had come and they had not had the root to carry it. You planted willow in fall. Everyone's father knew that. Nobody's husband did. She said none of this. She went in, set the coffee on, and when Harlan came out of his room she handed him a cup and asked him whether he wanted his eggs fried or scrambled. For 3 days she cleaned and cooked and watched. Harlan rode out in the mornings and came back with the sun, and she learned the size of his herd from the way he talked to the cow and the shape of his debt from the way he sat at the ledger. Eli trailed him to the corral and back at a distance of 20 feet, the way a dog trails a stranger who has not yet told it to go home. On the second evening Mara saw Harlan see something. Eli had finished his supper and, while she had her back turned, had slid the heel of the bread loaf into the sleeve of his shirt. He did it without looking up. He had been doing it since Rock Springs. Mara had stopped trying to make him quit. Harlan's eyes went to the sleeve and stayed a moment and went back to his plate. He said nothing. The next morning there was an extra slice beside Eli's plate, cut thick, and the morning after that, and Harlan never looked at it or at the boy while it disappeared. On the fourth morning she told him about the hay. It's spoiling from the bottom, she said. You've got maybe a foot of rot under the good. If you stack on it through winter you'll lose a third of the mow. He set his cup down. I've been stacking hay in that barn for 9 years. Yes, she said. He went out without his hat. She watched through the window as he crossed the yard and went into the barn, and she watched him come out again some time later and stand in the open door with his hands on his hips, looking at nothing, and she thought, it's worse than I said. It always was. He did not mention it at supper. On the 7th night, the night that was supposed to decide things, he ate and wiped his plate, and pushed the ledger across the table toward her with the pencil on top of it. Write down what you'd fix first, he said. And what did it cost me? She wrote 4 things, and under each she wrote what it would cost in lumber, in nails, in days. Harlan read the page twice and then turned the ledger back to his own columns and sat a long while looking from one to the other. The hay first, he said finally. Then the water. The rest if there's time. There won't be time for the rest if we wait, Mara said. The willows go in now or not at all. The ground's still soft. He looked at her the way he had looked at her in the yard the first day, taking a measure. Willows, he said. I'll explain it when I've got the posts in. It's easier to see than to say. The hay crib failed first. She built it in 2 days out of the pole shed scrap and a dozen peeled lodgepole, a platform to lift the stack off the dirt so air could move under it, and on the third morning she and Harlan forked the good hay up onto it and she watched the center sag under the weight until the slats bowed like a sprung bow. She had set the joists too far apart. Her father would have known it from across the yard. She took it apart that afternoon without saying anything, and rebuilt it with the joists at 18 inches and a cross brace under the center, and when they loaded it again it held. Harlan, forking hay beside her, said, "That's the way it should have been the first time," and she said, "Yes," and he said, "I wouldn't have known that either," and went on forking. The water line was worse because the water line was under the ground and you could not see it fail. She dug the swale out to 2.5 feet, laid the pipe in sand, and at the low end rigged a drain from a stock tank fitting so that when the trough valve was closed the line would empty itself downhill instead of sitting full and waiting to freeze. The first hard night came at the end of October, and in the morning she walked the line with her hand on the sod and found a low place she had missed, halfway along, where water had pooled in the pipe and iced. Not burst. Not yet. She dug it out and regraded it with a string line and a level she borrowed from his saddle shed, and the second hard night it drained clean. That was the month. Failure, correction, failure, correction. She was not ashamed of it. Her father had said the ground always had one more thing to tell you. The willows she paced out herself, walking from the barn's north wall with Nell on her hip and Eli counting her steps aloud. 34, she said and drove a stake. Then she turned the corner and paced the second leg west. An L set against the northwest. Harlan came and stood by the stake. 34 feet from the barn. The wind comes over the wall and drops what it's carrying on the lee side, she said. Too close and it drops the snow on your roof. Too far and it doesn't shelter the doors. 34 is about right for a wall this height once it grows, and the stakes and brush will do some of the work until it does. You've done this. I watched it done. He drove the first post without being asked. He drove them all, actually, while she set the cuttings between them, 200 of them cut from the creek willows and pushed into the fall soft ground at a lean. They wove dead brush through the posts to break the wind until the living wall could grow. It looked, when it was done, like the fence of a poor man's hog pen. Mara thought it was the best thing on the place. The barn doors were the last. She cut a new entrance in the south wall, offset from the old one so the wind could not find a straight line through the building, and Harlan boarded the northwest doors over and chinked them tight. She did the house the same week. New chinking, oakum and clay, every joint on the north side. The draft at knee-height stopped. He noticed. He did not say so, but he sat in the evening with his chair a foot nearer the wall than he had before. Nell woke one night at 2 and Mara was halfway out of the bed before she understood that the baby had stopped crying. She went to the kitchen door. Harlan was standing at the stove in his shirt with a bottle and a pan of water, Nell against his shoulder with her fist in his collar, and he was talking to her in the low voice he used for the milk cow. He heard Mara and did not turn around. "I was up," he said. He was not up. But she let it go and she let it go the next time, and by the third week there was no longer anything to let go. Eli had begun to walk beside him instead of behind, and to carry things. A bucket, a hammer, a coil of wire. He asked questions about the cattle and Harlan answered them as though the boy were a hired man. One morning at breakfast Eli reached for the extra slice beside his plate, looked at it, and ate it at the table in full view the way a person ate bread. Nobody remarked on it. Mara had to get up and see to the stove. Silas Glay rode in on a gray morning in the second week of November, a heavy man on a heavy horse. With the look of someone who owned the ground he rode over and intended to own more. He sat his saddle in the yard and looked at the brush-woven elm and laughed, not unkindly, the way you laugh at a child's fort. "The widow's willow wall," he said. "I'd heard. Harlan, you let a woman put you to building fences against the wind. She knows what she's about. Does she?" Glay turned his horse so that he faced the house and not the wall. "I rode over to make it easy. The note's due February. Sign me the spring rights and we call it square and you keep the place and the cattle and the cook. You won't get an offer that fair from the bank." Harlan stood with his hands at his sides. "The spring's the ranch. Without it the rest is grass." "Then think about it," Glay said, "while you've still got something to think with." He touched his hat to Mara who had come onto the porch and rode out. Harlan did not go to the ledger that night. He sat at the table with his hands flat on the wood and Mara saw what it cost him to have said no, and she understood that he had said it partly because she had been watching. Edwin March came 8 days later, a spare man with a government satchel and a county stamp, and he did not laugh at anything. He had a report from Glay that the Bellwether Spring was being tampered with and he wanted records. Feed drawn, water output, herd condition, 3 weeks of it in writing. "You'll have nothing of the kind," he said, "and I'll note it." Mara brought him the book. Not Harlan's ledger, her own, a school copybook she had ruled into columns the first week. Every day's hay forked from the crib. Every morning's flow at the trough measured with a bucket and a watch. Every animal's weight and condition by eye. The day the water line iced and what she had done. The day the crib sagged. March read for the better part of an hour. He asked 2 questions and wrote the answers down. Then he closed the book and put it in his satchel. "I'll need to keep this until I've checked it," he said. "You'll have it back." When he had gone Harlan said, "You wrote all that down." "My father said nobody believes a woman's word on a building," Mara said. "They believe a column." The last week of November she drove marker posts along the track from the road to the barn, and from the barn to the house, and tied rag strips to each one. Harlan, watching, said it seemed a lot of posts for a track a man could walk blind. "That's the idea," she said. "That he can." That night the sky went the color of pewter, and the wind, which had blown all autumn from the west, swung hard into the northwest and stayed there. It came down off the ridge at midnight on the 1st of December and it did not stop for 3 days. Mara woke to the sound of the house holding. That was how she thought of it afterward, not the wind, which was beyond sound, a pressure that lived in the chest, but the logs under it, the chinking she had packed by hand, the window that no longer rattled in its frame. She lay a moment and listened to the north wall and felt no draft at knee height, and then she got up and put on every piece of wool she owned. Harlan was already at the door with a lantern. 60 miles an hour if it's 10, he said. "I've never seen it like this. The stock. Can't see the barn from the porch." "You don't need to see it," she said. "There's posts." They went out roped together at the waist, which was his idea, and hand over hand along the ragtide markers, which was hers, and it was 29 below by the thermometer on the barn's south wall when they reached it. The offset door opened into a pocket of still air. Inside, the cattle were standing in dry straw with their heads down, and the hay on the crib was dry to the bottom and the trough was running. Harlan put his hand in the water and held it there as though to be sure. "It drained last night," Mara said. "I shut the valve at supper. I'll open it and let it run and shut it when we leave. He looked at her across the lantern. You shut it every night. Since October. On the second day a shape came down the markers. Eli saw it first from the barn door, a dark lump moving post to post along the rag ties, and called out, and Mara went out on the rope and brought it in. It was a man, or most of one, snow-packed to the eyes, and when she got the muffler off his face she knew him from Glay's crew. Noah Pike, 19, who had ridden fence along the shared line in September. He had been caught at the north pasture when it hit, lost his horse, walked 2 miles by guess and found a post with a rag on it. Followed the rags, he said when he could say anything. Didn't know where they went. Figured anywhere was better. Harlan got him into dry clothes and beside the stove. Then he went and stood in the door a while, looking at the nearest post, the rag snapping on it like a flag. A lot of posts, he said to nobody. The calf came the second night. One of the heifers had been due and went down in the straw at dark, and Mara saw in the lantern light that it was coming wrong, a tail and one hock and nothing else. Breech. Harlan had pulled calves for 9 years and he had never pulled a breech. His wife had done it once before she died, and he had stood where Eli was standing now. Hold the lamp, Mara told the boy. Hold it high and hold it still, and if you can't, say so and I'll set it down. I can, Eli said. He could. She stripped to the shoulder in the cold and went in and found the other leg and brought it around, slow, the way she had seen her father do with a ewe, working with the heifer straining and not against it, and it took the better part of an hour. Eli's arm shook and he moved the lamp to the other hand and did not lower it. When the calf came it came all at once and lay steaming in the straw, and Mara cleared its mouth and rubbed it hard with a sack until it sneezed, and the boy laughed, a real laugh, the first she had heard out of him since June. Harlan had come up behind them sometime in that hour. He did not say anything. He put his hand on Eli's shoulder and the boy let it stay. The wall broke an hour before dawn on the third day. They heard it, a crack through the wind and then a change in the sound of the barn, a rising whistle at the northwest corner where there had been none. Harlan went to the old boarded door and put his hand against it and felt the cold driving through the joints. Post snapped, Mara said. Second leg near the corner if the sound's right. The brush'll go next and then the whole corner's open. It'll hold till morning. It won't. He looked at her and at the door and at the rope coiled by it. Then I'm going with you. They went out the south door together, tied at the waist with 6 feet between, and the moment they cleared the building's lee the wind took them both off their feet. Mara crawled. She could not have stood, nobody could have. She went on her belly along the line of the wall with Harlan's weight behind her on the rope and the snow coming sideways into her eyes, and she found the break by touch. A post sheared at the ground, the brush sagging away from it, the gap a yard wide and growing. There was no speech in it. She had brought a spare pole and a length of wire. She shoved the pole into the drift behind the broken stump. Harlan came up beside her and leaned his weight on it while she lashed it to the standing posts on either side, 3 wraps and a twist, her fingers dead inside her mittens, and then they dragged the brush back into the gap and wedged it and she tied it off and lay a moment with her face in the snow, breathing. Harlan's hand found her shoulder. He pulled on the rope once and she understood, and they crawled back along the wall to the south door and fell through it into the still air, and the whistle at the corner had stopped. It quit on the 4th morning. The sky came up hard and blue and the drifts lay where the wall had put them, in a long white ridge 30 feet from the barn and nothing on the roof. Every animal was standing. The breech calf was sucking. Noah Pike went home on a borrowed horse, and within the week word came back with him and with others. Anders had lost 11 head at the creek. The Dutchman south of the river had lost his whole winter calf crop in an open corral. Glay had lost 19. Coldwater Reach had lost none. Edwin March rode in with the copybook in his satchel and handed it to Mara on the porch. The complaint's dismissed, he said. I checked your flow figures against the spring survey. Nobody's tampered with anything. What you've done is the first honest winter record I've seen on this range. He hesitated. I'd like to copy it if you'd allow. For the county. Silas Glay came 2 days after that, alone, and got off his horse, which he had not done the first time. He stood in the yard and looked at the willow wall with the drift lying behind it, and he took off his hat. 34 feet, he said. From a wall this height, Mara said. Yours would be different. Depends on the barn. Would you show me? She showed him. She walked him the length of it and explained the lean of the cuttings and the brush and the drain on the water line, and he listened the way a man listens who has buried 19 animals, and when he left he did not mention the note. Harlan brought it up himself at the table in January, with the ledger closed and a different paper in front of him. I had Tom Riddell in Medicine Bow draw this, he said. It's a partnership. Your name on the ranch alongside mine. half with the children's part written in so that whatever happens to either of us, they've got a home here and nobody can put them off it. Mara read it. She read it twice the way he had read her first page in October. This is yours, she said. The place. The cattle. I came here with a broken cart. I'm not giving you what was mine. He said it carefully as though he had been working it out for some time. I'm naming what you already carried. You carried it the first morning you walked the ground before I was up. I've only just got around to writing it down. She signed. He signed. Neither of them said anything else, and that was all right. They married in May in the yard, with Riddell for a witness in March who had asked to come, and Noah Pike, and the willow wall behind them in full green leaf at last, the cuttings rooted and the brush pulled out and burned. Afterward Mara stood on the porch with the ledger under her arm, because she was going to write the day in it, and Nell let go of Eli's hand in the grass and stood swaying on her own. Then she walked 4 steps, 5, straight across the yard toward the man coming from the corral, and fell against his knees and said, "Pa," and he picked her up. Mara thought about the winter sometimes in the years that came. People spoke of it as the storm that spared Coldwater Reach, as though the weather had looked down and chosen. She did not argue with them. But she knew that the winter had shown no mercy to anyone. It had come looking for every weak joint on the range and found them, and the only reason it had found none on this ranch was that a woman who had come asking for milk had walked the ground in the flat light and fixed each one before the storm could. And she knew the other thing too, which she never said aloud because it did not need saying. She had not rescued Harlan Bellwether and he had not rescued her. They had each been living alone and calling it strength. One autumn they had simply stopped.